I was in college, and I can't remember the year, but I believe it was 1999. And I was watching a pay-per-view, and I can't remember what it was called, but I believe it was Survivor Series. And third from the top, there's a match that's going to take place featuring Owen Hart. But instead of going to the ring and showing the walkouts, they do a very tight close-up shot on Jim Ross, who's the announcer. And Jim Ross informs us, the viewing audience, that match isn't going to happen and that there has been an accident. And we're sitting there watching a scripted performance. A scripted performance from an organization that knows no bounds. They will have a woman get her top pulled off. They will have a man body slam that woman. There is nothing else on television that is like this. There's nothing with as few of parameters as this. So when Jim Ross is informing us that they have had an accident, we did not believe him. And the internet was out in 1999, but the internet was different. Guys, don't forget your smartphone, your iPhone, things like that, your Android and your Blackberries, those came out 2008, 2007, somewhere like in this time frame. This is off the top of my head. So having the internet was very different. Having these .coms or the dirt sheets or places that you could go to get information, it was really tough. So when Jim Ross is telling us there has been a problem, there has been an accident, we're having medical personnel attending to Owen Hart, calling him his shoot name, not his work name of the Blue Blazer. It felt different. Now, you knew it was an angle. You knew they were working. You knew they were getting ready to make a big spin, but you couldn't figure out what it was going to be. And Jim Ross all of a sudden gets a tear in his eye, and he starts breaking down the fourth wall by using a vernacular that they don't use, such as, this is not a work. This is not a wrestling angle. And he begins to tell the audience of how serious it gets. Now, we, in our living rooms all over the world, were able to know that this was part of the script. We were able to know it was part of the script because when it was time for the main event, which that night happened to be Stone Cold Steve Austin, the glass broke and he made the walk. And in no scenario would you move forward with a show if an accident, the way that it was being portrayed to us, had taken place, right? And Vince McMahon took a lot of flack for that. And Vince McMahon was of the mind, no matter how terrible this was, we are going to move on. Now, for some of you that think we should move on tomorrow night, or for those of you that think we should move on 2 weeks from now, or for those of you like me that believe we're going to move on right now, one thing we have in common is we're going to move on. It's just a question of when, and here's the answer: now. Right now. It's a very interesting concept. I don't fault him for that. I don't fault Vince for that. Number one rule in show business is the show must go on. We had a pandemic hit, a world pandemic hit. We're doing Submission Underground, grappling events. And we went from a sought-after show to the number one grappling show in the world. The only grappling show to this day that has ever been discussed on SportsCenter. And we did that by default. We were the only ones. Everybody else quit. We found a way to move forward. So I tell you that we were number one, we were, but there was no second, there was no third, there was nobody else there. There was plenty of judgments and plenty of scrutiny that went through. And I bring this all to your attention because one of the biggest names in fighting, and that's moving, right? That's a carousel. That's a very much a revolving door, the biggest name. But one of the biggest names is Michel Chandler. And one of the reasons that it's Michel Chandler is not just because he's handsome. It's not just because he was an All-American from Missouri. It's not just because he was Fight of the Year dating way back when. It's not just because he was a champion of this and a top contender of this. It's because he's on ESPN every single week in something called The Ultimate Fighter. As big as Chandler is now, 1 week from now, Chandler will be even bigger. And 1 week after that, whatever the hell's going on in Michel Chandler's life, he's going to be even bigger than that. He's on ESPN every single week with a show called The Ultimate Fighter. Now, what do you do with that? Because it appears that his opponent doesn't want to fight. And we can sugarcoat this all we want, guys. And for some reason, for some really effective reason, USADA is the one and only question. I mean, somehow you can't get beyond Conor versus Chandler. You can't get to step one without somebody shouting out USADA. Maybe that's right, and maybe that's not. It is for sure accurate when I tell you the phenomenon of what is stopping Conor from fighting Chandler is USADA. That's true. The phenomenon, at a minimum, exists. Can we agree? So what do you do if you're Chandler? I mean, what do you do? This is a handsome, top contending prize fighter that has a weekly appearance on ESPN. He's got everything in his hand. And the only one with a little bit more stroke than that, a little bit more pull and a little bit more power, happens to be Conor McGregor. So what do you do? I woke up today to quite a treat. It was Eddie Alvarez. And I was talking with my partner, Ryan, who did not remember or never knew in the first place the history between Alvarez and Chandler. So I told him, and I had a lot of fun telling him. Okay. Eddie Alvarez sends out a tweet today, and he says, Michael Chandler, you will never be without an opponent as long as I am alive. Hashtag trilogy. Now, that gave me chills. Truly. Ooh. Do you know what he's talking about? Okay, way back when, there was a young man who was an All-American, Division I out of the University of Missouri named Michael Chandler, who had absolutely no business being in a main event. He had no business being in the cage with Eddie Alvarez. And that fight starts and Chandler wouldn't go away. And that fight continues on and Chandler looked better than you thought he would. And that fight goes on and Chandler all of a sudden has some hope. And when that fight comes to an end, it's not only fight of the night, it goes on, it becomes fight of the year. This is a 24-year-old Michael Chandler, so of course they redo it. But now Eddie knows what he's getting into, and they go out, and I believe they were fight of the year again. I know they were nominated. I think they were fight of the year. Again, now they've split. They've split outcomes, so of course you go to number 3, and that's all that Eddie was talking about. And I remember how meaningful that was, and I had such an enjoyment telling Ryan about their past. And as I'm telling Ryan's online, I can hear him typing and he's looking it up and he's looking up the dates and he's looking up the rounds and he's looking up how the fights ended. And I would love to sit here, guys, with some beautiful piece of advice. But we'd have to start at step 1, which is somehow the narrative on that fight is solely about Conor and the United States Anti-Doping Association. That's it. That's what this is about. If Conor turns and walks now, it won't have anything to do from Conor was afraid to fight Chandler. When these rumors are coming out that Conor is in fact going to fight, but it won't be Chandler, it's going to be Charles Oliveira. There was no egg on the face of McGregor. Okay, great, let's get on with it, and it's going to be Oliveira. This was the attitude. Now, Chandler wouldn't be given that same respect. If Chandler was the one to turn and walk, it would not get pegged on paperwork or a third-party association, in this case, USADA. He would get called a chicken. He would be afraid. The fight got too big, the lights got too bright. That's the way that would happen. So how, if we know that, can we get Conor to agree to do what he's already said he's going to do? And we've filmed a television show known as The Ultimate Fighter completely around, and people are saying that the ratings for that are down. And that's a very interesting concept, but allow me to just lay down and tell you they are. It's not because one of those two guys isn't as interested. It's because there's a disbelief by the audience that the match is going to happen. It's very hard, and people have that with inside of them, right? Some kids at Christmas presents, just by an example, they want to go shake the box. And they want to turn it upside down, and they want to ask mom and dad a bunch of questions, and other kids don't even want to see them at all. And other kids can't help it. When mom and dad aren't looking, they're going to slip open, they're going to look at it, and they're going to package it just perfectly. There's nothing they can do. As bad as they want the surprise, they got to know, and they got to know right now. But it's a very real thing. And when the public is not convinced that they're ever going to be able to see what it is you're promising, it's hard. It's hard to get your hopes up. It's hard to set those expectations. It's hard no matter how much fun the dance might be if you're not sure the girl's going to go. It's just hard. How much can I look forward to it? And I just feel that Chandler's in this wildly difficult spot, and out of nowhere, Eddie Alvarez proved it. There was nobody, including Charles Oliveira. I saw the call out over the weekend, and Charles Oliveira has this poster made, and he puts it out through his official Twitter account. Charles versus Conor. Right on. Wherever I was on Conor, wherever I was on Charles, man, that dead even. And it would have been a positive and so on and so forth. I was excited when Eddie called out Chandler. It was a totally different deal. It was a total different elevation. It was a total different story. It's the trilogy that should have happened. And I'm not assuring for you guys that that's the direction we're going to go. I'm attempting to paint a picture for you that you have two guys that are very sincere in Eddie and Chandler. So that way it's very easy to get excited about this. It's very easy to mark that on your calendar. It's very easy to want to tune in, to watch the countdowns. And it's been very difficult to do that with McGregor. And not just with Chandler. The fake news that came out that somebody took the time and went to the expense to do digital artwork for of Conor versus Oliveira was a flop compared to what they thought it was going to do. You go look at the retweets, you go look at the engagements for that. It was a flop compared to what you would have thought it was going to do. And the deal that Conor has with the audience, and red painting night is still a very, very real thing. Conor is still the draw in the sport, but it's fading. And there is a deal with the audience that has to do with sincerity. And it doesn't have to do with the United States Anti-Doping Association. It used to. That used to be where we wanted to go with that. But now it's appearing that it just has to do with competition itself. And as far as that competition goes, there's one guy that's got a weekly spot on ESPN and it ain't going away, and his name is Michel Chandler. And he's looking for an opponent. He wants it to be meaningful. It doesn't need to be a number one contenders match. It doesn't even need to be a championship match. He needs to be a match that you guys want to see. And out of nowhere comes Eddie Alvarez. That is a very, very interesting proposition. We'll see where it goes. I don't know. I'm no better than my gut reaction. I'm no better than when I got my thumb on top of something. But every now and then I will go to what never lies, which is the numbers. And I will go look at the artwork put out by Charles Oliveira's official Twitter account. And it didn't go very far. He didn't get any level of bump for Red Panda Night as he got for a rematch with Islam, of which also has digital artwork out on the same page. You can scroll down and see it for yourself. He didn't get any bump, and that was a surprise for me. And you start to wonder who's going to be more coveted when all is said and done. What a difference a day makes. What a difference a week makes. And the one constant and the one thing you can count on that's come from this whole thing, the one guy who's in shape, who's prepared, who has his paperweight, and who wants an opponent is Michel Chandler. And according to Eddie Alvarez, he's also got the opponent.